Test, test. Mm. Testing, test.
Good morning, everybody. We'll see. Stand over here. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our power lunch today. I'm Heather Hankins. I'm your 2020 chairman of the board. And thanks for being here. What a great turnout. I'm so happy to see you all today. Did everybody enjoy their lunch? Yeah, it's really good, wasn't it? A little spicy, but I love spicy, so it was great. Okay, so just want to let you know a little bit about some upcoming Smedra events so you can get these on your calendar. We have our January Power Breakfast, which is this Friday right here in this room, starting at 8:15. And I'd love for you to join us. We're going to be having our Smedra Year in Review, which is going to be a panel with myself, our past chair, Marcel Savoy, and our chair-elect, Brian Anzer, and our CEO here, Melissa Maldonado. So you can be here for that. We'd love to see you, and there'll be a hot breakfast as well. We also have a Diversity Challenges panel coming up next week on the 22nd, and that's from 2 to 4:30. And I think that's going to be a really informative event. So if you can be here for that, we'd love to see you then as well. Please make sure you RSVP for all these events online at smedra.com under your member portal or email our events coordinator, Adriana Franklin, who's right over here, at adriana@smedra.com. So I would like to thank, first of all, our sponsors this morning. We have Rob Ladd with Landmark Home Inspections and Stacy King and Chelsea Brown with My Denver Mortgage. So let's give them a round of applause. And we're going to let them say a few words.
You're what?
Where's Rob? He disappeared around the corner. There he is.
I've been called way worse things than rap, so that's okay. Good morning. My name is Rob Ladd, and my company is Landmark Home Inspections. I see a lot of familiar faces this morning, so several of you have worked with us. We've inspected houses for your clients, but some of you probably haven't heard of us because we've only been in the Denver area for about a year. So if you haven't, here's kind of who we are in a nutshell. We're a family-owned and operated company based out of Kansas City. My father started the company. Once upon a time, I was his first employee. A couple months after that, he hired my brother. Right now, my sister Steph oversees the day-to-day operations at the Kansas City office. We are also one of the largest home inspection companies in the country. Now, what does it mean to be among the largest? Nationally, your average home inspection company in a large market, like Denver or Kansas City, is going to do in the area of around 3 to maybe 400 inspections a year. There are larger multi-inspector firms doing 600 inspections a year. Last year, Our Kansas City office did 5,000. So what's the key to our success? Well, it's our business philosophy. And it's pretty simple. It has only 4 words. And those 4 words are, it's not about us. Now, if it's not about us, who is it about? Well, it's about you. And we don't say that because it's a catchy marketing slogan or because it sounds good. We say it because it's true. That every service we offer, every program we've launched, every feature we provide is designed for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to help each and every one of you grow your real estate business. And so the question becomes, like, how does a home inspection company help me grow my real estate business? There are 9 unique things that our company does. I only want to tell you about 3 of them today. And the first has to do with time management. Now, we know that when you and your client sign a contract, you're on the clock. You typically get about 10 to maybe 14 days for your inspection period, and that's a lot to get done in a short amount of time, especially in busier parts of the year when a lot of home inspection companies will be booked out a week to 2 weeks in advance. It doesn't do you or your clients any good to have an inspection on the 13th day of a 14-day period. That is why we created what we call the 48-hour guarantee, which says we guarantee we will inspect your client's home within 48 business hours of when you contact us, or the inspection is free. Here's the way that works. You give us a call today, and we guarantee we can inspect that house by the end of business on Friday. And if we haven't, we can still do the inspection on Saturday or Sunday, but your client won't pay a penny. Next item. We like to say thanks to our clients for using us. This is a service industry. There are a lot of home inspection companies out there, and we want your clients to know how thankful we are that they have chosen us to represent them in one of the most important financial decisions they will make in their entire life, buying a house. And we used to do like Starbucks gift cards and movie passes. We're huge movie buffs in our family. But after a while, we started thinking like we could probably do better than a gift card. We really ought to be giving our clients something tangible, something they can hold in their hands, something that could literally save their lives someday. And what we came up with is called the Buyer Safety Kit. It has 3 items. Usually I've got my bigger, younger brother here to help me out here, so I'm going to do it on my own. First item. Thousands of people die from carbon monoxide poisoning every single year, but tens of thousands of people get sick thinking they have the flu. Symptoms can be really similar. Every home should have at least one carbon monoxide alarm. In fact, Colorado requires it. Here's one on us. Next item is an electric outlet tester. Thousands of houses catch fire every year, and most of those fires start at simple electrical outlets. We give your client the very same diagnostic tool that we use when we're inspecting the house to help them identify a potential fire hazard before it becomes a reality. Now, the follow-up question we sometimes get from like agents or clients at the end of the inspection is like, well, didn't you check the outlets in my house? Of course. But we can't move a lot of things in the house. A china cabinet, a king-size bed, a big screen TV. Inevitably, there's going to be a couple outlets. Oh, hey, I'm back. A couple outlets that we can't check. So we always tell people, double check the outlet just to make sure it's safe before you plug something in. The last thing in this bag is a book titled Now That You Have Had Your Home Inspection. It's a book that basically tells them how to take care of the house. The routine maintenance that virtually any homeowner can do on their own, the stuff that should be done professionally, but also the stuff to look out for. Scary looking things that are really not that big a deal, but also small stuff that can be indicative of a larger underlying problem. It is a book designed to help them get the maximum amount of equity out of their investment. And we take all 3 items and we throw them back inside this state-of-the-art Landmark home inspection bag. It's a little shameless marketing on our part. The last thing I want to tell you about is our pricing. On average in the Denver area, you spend about $350 for a home inspection. But there are companies out there that charge $400, $500, up to $600 for a home inspection. Ours are $299. Now, we know we're the low price leader in Denver, and we've done that on purpose. We have intentionally priced ourselves 15 to 50% below the market. And we don't try to squeeze in pennies and dimes and dollars out of every inspection. We out-hustle our competition. And we believe that if you take all of these unique features, a world-class inspection at a discount price, it not only makes us look good, it makes you look good as well. And when you look good, you get a happy client. What do happy clients usually do? They usually give referrals. And what do referrals do? They help you grow your real estate business. Why do we do all these things? Because it's not about us. It is about you. Again, my name is Rob Ladd. My brother Mike owns the company out here with me. Our company is called Landmark Home Inspections. Hopefully, everybody here has a brochure. If you don't, I'll make sure that I get you one. I hope you'll give us a chance to show you what we can do. I guarantee you we will knock it out of the park for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. And now I've got Stacey King and Chelsea Brown with My Denver Mortgage.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Stacey King, co-owner of My Denver Mortgage Company. I've been in the mortgage business for 20 years now. And My Denver Mortgage Company, we're a mortgage broker. So what does that mean? Being a mortgage broker gives us the ability to shop interest rate for your customers so they don't need to shop. We do the shopping for them. We have access to hundreds of lenders. So we check their rates, we check programs. We want to make sure that we're getting truly the best loan available for our customers. We have all of your traditional loans, of course, VA, FHA, down payment assistance, but we also do non-traditional loans. So for example, a bank statement loan for someone who's self-employed, they write off a lot on taxes and they can't qualify using their tax returns. We can qualify them using deposits on personal or business bank statements. So that's just one example of a non-traditional type program that we do. Something important to mention is we're local, obviously, but we are so local, we're right here in the Smedra building. So if you're ever at a class, a training, and you have a question for a lender, you can walk down the hall and there we are. So we'd love the opportunity to help you. Our contact information is on the flyers that you have. If you didn't get a flyer, let us know. We have extras in the back. Our information is also right here. And I'll hand it over to the other co-owner, Chelsea.
Hi guys, I'm Chelsea Brown. I'm the other co-owner of My Denver Mortgage Company. I too have been in the industry 19 years now. One of the flyers that we handed out, I just wanted to touch on. We have a high balance loan that goes up to $765,600 with only 10% down, no MI. It could be used on a primary, second home, or investment. It's one of our the rates are great, just like a conforming loan. We do these all the time. They're just a great option. It doesn't matter what county or what the county limit is. It's a nationwide high balance, so we can still go that high. In addition to the bank statement loan, we also have a P&L program for those self-employed buyers. And I would say 90% of our business is purchase business, so we're very versed in contracts and amends and everything that you deal with on a daily basis. So thank you for being here. And if you have any questions, come see us.
Thank you so much, and thanks again for sponsoring today. Okay, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. We have Lisa Karen Welch and Sabrina Calnan. And Lisa is part owner and business development manager for Equity Insurance Group, and Sabrina is owner of Select Property Services, a firm that specializes in the management of both Airbnb and traditional rentals. So let's welcome them and hear everything we need to know about Airbnb.
Hey guys, is this too loud? Okay, am I good? All right. I don't do a mic very often. My grandmother said that the Karens learn to whisper in a sawmill, so I don't usually need a mic. Welcome to our 53rd Airbnb class since January of last year. Wow. Also, we are booked until June of 2020. So if we look a little tired today, we might be, but we love doing this class for you all. How many people are privy to some of the negative things that have been going on with short-term rentals all over the world, actually? Yeah, right? All the yucky stuff ends up on the front page of the newspaper. The felonies, the 5 people that were shot in California on Halloween night. But what we're here to tell you is the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we're going to try to walk a really thin line between both sides because there is also amazing things that are going on for cities because of short term rentals. And is a ton of money that is being made. And small businesses are also reaping enormous benefits from short term rental. So this class is ever evolving. If you took it from us last year, today you will find that it is a completely different class. In fact, you updated it at 5 a.m. this morning. I was not up at 5 a.m. this morning. We were at a short term rental meeting last night, and there is yet again more information for us to share with you. So, we have probably changed this class monthly. It just keeps getting, poor Sabrina, we don't have a life. So, we call this our little soap opera. It's like so exciting. It's ever changing and evolving, and tons of emotions involved, etc. So my name is Lisa Karen Welch, and I literally fell upon Airbnb when I spent a lot of time, because that's what I do with realtors all day long. And I knew that you guys were talking about it, and there was simply no answers out there. And your clients were asking about it, and there was simply no answers out there. So I'm an educator by nature. My bedroom when I was growing up was completely decked out like a classroom. The bed was just a total nuisance, and I would drag my poor little sisters downstairs every night after they'd been at school all day long and teach them what I had learned that day. They still love me, thank God. So it drove me crazy. I knew that information needed to get out there. So I put together a panel. Was anybody at our PPA panel event one of them? Wow. Okay. So we did 2 events 5 months apart, and we packed the PPA center with a wait list. Sabrina was one of my panelists. Her and I go way back, and we decided to develop a class and take our show on the road, if you will. And as I just said before, we are teaching like crazy. So we definitely found a topic that is ever evolving and changing. So the insurance piece of it drove me crazy too. I knew these properties were not being properly insured, and I'm going to speak to that later on in the class. But Sabrina's going to start us off today. I call her my work wife. We spend a lot of time together, and I absolutely adore her. She's the brains behind this operation, and you're going to start us today.
All right. Can you guys hear me? Yes, it's working. All right. Yes, I am new to all this fancy microphone technology, so bear with me just a second here. So, like Lisa said, my name is Sabrina. I actually come to Airbnb from a more personal level, as well as a professional level. One moment, let me just get my microphone stuck in my pocket here. All right. So I have a little carriage house on the back of my home. I live in the West Wash Park neighborhood. The little carriage house has been there since 1930. I'm one of the very lucky people who got grandfathered in with the ADU on my property when I purchased it. And the funny thing about that is, I'll tell a quick story, is that when we purchased it, um, we had people tell us that it was not a good purchase, that nobody wants an ADU on their property. It's going to reduce your property value. And lo and behold, here this little carriage house is just in high demand. So we had this little carriage house in the back of our house. And about 3.5 years ago, I decided that I was just itching for another project in my life, and I really needed to remodel something. And the carriage house was the perfect candidate because it had not been touched since 1980. And we had a tenant in there who was very particular, and he would never let us upgrade. He always wanted us, when we fixed something, to do the exact same thing as before, which was interesting. Um, so I remodeled that carriage house 3.5 years ago. We converted that from a long-term rental to a short-term rental. I am a property manager, so I was starting to see this need in the market for short-term rentals. I was helping out some clients renting out places that were furnished on a monthly basis. That's where I really started to see the need, and then Airbnb was, really starting to become more popular. So I decided that I would have my carriage house available for both options. And after playing with it a little bit, lo and behold, the Airbnb option was hands down the best way for me to go. And so that's where I really fell in love with Airbnb. And I'm not the kind of person who just does something and sees what happens. I'm like a super nerd and I follow all the rules and I never drank beer in high school. So when I started my Airbnb, I made sure that I was following all the rules. I made sure that I really learned the Airbnb platform and system. I understood the other short-term rental platforms out there, what was best for Denver, how the algorithms work, what guests are expecting. I just, went all in and figured out how to do it in the most profitable, legal way possible. And so with that, it ended up being it just ended up being a great transition into other services for my company. So I had a lot of clients asking me about short-term rentals because word was getting out. I had a lot of realtors who I work with asking me about short-term rentals. And so naturally, I decided to add some co-hosting services to our list of services as a traditional property manager. I always like to let people know that I am a licensed real estate agent. You have to be to do property management, but my firm does not do anything on the buy sell side of things. So, the wonderful thing about my relationships with realtors is that I'm really here to provide a great service to your client to make you look good. But the greatest thing about property management is that I'm here to keep that client a warm lead for you at all times because I'm in constant contact with them when I help them manage a property. And when they go to sell that investment property or to purchase more investment property, they usually come to me first to let me know. And at that point in time, I get to refer them right back to you. So it's a really fun way to have, work with my realtor clients. My company does your traditional unfurnished 12-month lease. We do executive rentals, which is your 30-day or more furnished rental. And then we do the short-term rental, which is the 30-day or less uh, furnished rental. And the 30-day or less furnished rental is what we're going to be discussing today. That I will use that term short-term rental, Airbnb, home sharing. These are all essentially the same thing. Airbnb is actually a listing platform similar to Zillow, specifically for short-term rentals, but it's so popular that Airbnb is sort of like the Kleenex of short-term rental. We just use Airbnb and short-term rental interchangeably. So I always like to understand who I have in the room. We have a lot of people in the room today. So how many people do we have who have stayed in Airbnb properties? Okay, so we've got probably a good 80 to 90% of people. And then how many Airbnb hosts do we have in the room? All right, a good amount of hosts. I'm going to ballpark at 25% here. And then how many realtors do we have in the room? Okay, so we do have mostly realtors in the room. And this class is, it is really geared towards realtors and meant to be helpful to realtors. If you're not a realtor, it will also be useful for you. So since we have a lot of people who have used the Airbnb platform, I'll go over kind of how Airbnb works on behalf of the host very quickly here. So like I said, Airbnb is a listing platform. You can list entire home rentals on Airbnb. You could list a room in your home on Airbnb. You could list a guest suite on your home in Airbnb. I actually had an assistant who had a camping trailer, and when her and her husband weren't out camping, they would park it in her front yard and they would list that on Airbnb. Um, and the funny thing is, Airbnb did not start out to be what it is today by any means. Right now, the Airbnb rentals, they compete with hotels. People stay in an Airbnb, they expect hotel standards. Well, when Airbnb first started out, it was meant for people to rent air mattresses for people to sleep on in their living rooms. And that's where the Airbnb name came from. So totally different than it used to be. Now, the great thing about Airbnb is they, are a newer platform, so they really got with it very quickly. So one of the things that I love about Airbnb is that you don't ever have to worry about collecting funds from your guests. They handle all of that for you. You're pretty much guaranteed to get paid. And the other really revolutionary thing that Airbnb did that nobody had done before, they're not certainly not the first short-term rental platform out there. Vrbo has been around forever. Uh, they decided to base their program or their platform on social proof. So what that means is that the guest reviews the host reviews the guest, And with that, everyone is supposed to behave themselves and do what they are supposed to be doing. Through the Airbnb platform, it's very difficult to make contact outside of the platform with a guest prior to them making the booking at your home. So the screening process through Airbnb is different. And so they've been relying on this social proof, which has come into question lately in a big way. And it's a big deal for Airbnb because Airbnb is set to go public later on this year. And if this social proof isn't a proven concept, it could really affect that public offering. Just a few months back on Halloween, there was some big news. There was a house party over at an Airbnb in the California area, and there were 5 people shot at this Airbnb party. And the guest had lied to the host. The guest had said they were staying there to get away from the fires. That was not their intention at all. And so that really made some big news for Airbnb. Airbnb sort of went out to the presses, did some damage control. They are saying that they are implementing ways to screen and not prevent party houses from being listed on the platform. There is definitely a lot of skepticism out there amongst the hosts. Airbnb has a long history of really holding the host accountable, but they don't necessarily hold the guest accountable. So we will see what comes from that. Does anyone have any questions about any of this stuff? All right. And so I just want to mention that feel free to raise your hand, ask questions, give me your input as we go out through the class. It's always a better class and a more interesting class when we have you guys participating and putting in your input. Hosts, I especially love your feedback throughout the class because you guys have a whole different perspective. So please feel free to interrupt me, raise your hand. I'll grab questions. Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to know on Airbnb is, are you restricted to using that service only in a home that you own or occupy?
No.
Completely different property.
Yeah. So the platform doesn't control any of that. It could be an investment property, a vacation home up in the mountains, could be any type of home listed on the platform. Now, different cities and different counties have regulation on Airbnb, which I'll get into, but Airbnb does not help regulate at all. Yeah.
That they collect money, they also pay taxes for like Denver.
Yeah. Yeah, so Airbnb is, one of the first platforms to really take this on, but in any city where Airbnb is super popular, they tend to negotiate and work with the city where they are allowed to collect and remit lodging tax on behalf of the owner. So in Denver, for example, the guest is charged the lodging tax through Airbnb, the proper amount. No, there's no issue there. And then Airbnb remits those taxes to City of Denver in a monthly sum each month. And the only thing the homeowner is responsible for doing is filing once a year so the city can somehow track where all of these funds are coming from. Yeah.
The only exception is there are some jurisdictions, like if you have a property in Estes Park where there's a third tier of a market district tax that does not get remitted through Airbnb. So Larimer County and the state of Colorado does, but not the local market district. So there is a third one that, depending on where the property is, you may have some extra work that is needed, but most cases it's just like that.
Gotcha. Did everybody hear her? So what she said was she has a property in Estes Park, and Estes Park has a third tier tax that Airbnb does not collect and remit for them. They collect everything for Larimer County and everything for Colorado, but they don't collect specifically what Estes Park has. So it's something that you should be aware of. Depending on the location of your Airbnb, find out what taxes, if there's any special taxes out there. Yeah. Yes, yeah. And Verbo, you have to set up your own taxes, which I think is really scary because the tax percentage in every city is different that you should be collecting. And if you put it in incorrectly, you could be incorrectly collecting the taxes. But Verbo right now is leaving it up to the host to collect and remit those taxes. There are whisperings of Verbo sort of moving to that Airbnb system because it just makes it so much easier for hosts and so much easier for the cities to collect the money. Yes, back here. Mm. Yeah, that's a very good point. So for those of you that didn't hear, she was saying that VRBO has a very different process than Airbnb, and they don't do any verifications, they don't check IDs, and they don't guarantee payment. So if someone has used a credit card that is stolen, or if the charge doesn't go through appropriately, someone can check into your home without having paid through VRBO. So we, as a company, I really advocate for the Airbnb platform because it is safest for our hosts, not only from the payment perspective, but from a damages perspective as well. Now, if you are located in a vacation town, if you're located in the mountains somewhere, Summit County, Winter Park, you're going to need to use VRBO regardless because VRBO is the more popular platform for those types of rentals. Yes, back here. Yes, so we'll actually get to that in a second here. And I'll give a quick answer. In City of Denver, the answer is yes. In most places, the answer is no. Yep. All right, guys. Any other questions before I move on? Yeah. Who's governing Airbnb? Right now, Airbnb is working directly with cities and counties. Um, what what sort of governing body? I don't know if there's anything on a national level really, other than your general business practices sort of thing that they adhere to what every other company does. But their Airbnb certainly has had um, a lot of conflict with different cities because cities are wanting Airbnb to take more of a role in the regulation and ensuring that the properties listed are safe and good for neighborhoods and things like that. And Airbnb has provided a lot of pushback on that up until recently when that news came out about that five person shooting. So yeah. Any other questions? Okay. So this is a quick little map here. Um, so this is you know what I just realized? I just realized I updated this presentation this morning, and the presentation we have here is the one from last night. So I will speak you guys through the new updates. Um, and there were only a few things updated, so don't worry. So this is a map of the Denver area, just to give you sort of a lay of the land here. This is downtown Highlands. If you move all the way down here, this is Wash Park down here. Um, These red dots are the entire home rentals in Denver. And as you can see, we had this map is a little bit older. We had around 5,000 Airbnbs last year at this time. We currently have between 3 and 4,000 Airbnb listings in the Denver area. And you can see the concentrations are sort of where you would expect them to be. They're in the areas that are most walkable. They're in the areas closest to downtown. Um, what's interesting is that they are mostly entire home rentals. And the rule in Denver is that it must be your primary residence in order to rent out your home through Airbnb. And so Denver, City of Denver has really been trying to regulate the primary residence rule, and they've been updating and constantly trying to, sort of alter the rules to make them make sense. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. These numbers are the Airbnb guest arrivals and host income for 2018. So Airbnb is fairly new. We didn't have a ton of Airbnbs a couple of years ago. What's happened is that the number of Airbnb listings has sort of grown exponentially. And now everybody's trying to sort of catch up and figure out what the heck is going on with all of these Airbnb properties. So, really, 2018 was the first year we've had a decent amount of data on Airbnb. And these numbers were provided by Airbnb to the Denver Business Journal. These are year-long numbers for 2018. The numbers for 2019 have not come out yet. But in 2018, we had almost 500,000 guest arrivals in Denver, with 75 million in host revenue in Denver alone. And you can see that Airbnb has become so popular that it's sort of spread out to where you might not expect it to be. We've got 53,000 in guest arrivals in Adams County, which isn't your traditional close to restaurants, walkable downtown type area, and almost 6 million in host revenue in Adams County alone. Now, keep in mind that these numbers are from Airbnb directly. So your numbers for Summit County, Eagle County, Routt County, Grand County, all of the counties up in the mountains are going to be skewed because they don't include the Verbo listings as well. These are the top 10. Yep. This is directly from Airbnb. No, directly through Airbnb, not AirDNA. Is that what you're asking? Yeah, this is directly through Airbnb provided to the Denver Business Journal. Yep. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. So, like I said, we haven't had a lot of data on Airbnb up until recently. And one of the things that really comes into question with Airbnb is what is the economic impact of Airbnb on these cities and towns? We get really two pieces of opposition to Airbnb that we hear the most. Number one is that it can disrupt the fabric of a neighborhood. Neighbors do not necessarily feel safe with an Airbnb next door, people who are coming and going that aren't strongly vetted, people who come to Denver to smoke pot and party and leave trash all around, that sort of thing. And then the other big opposition to Airbnb is that people are afraid that short-term rentals will affect the affordable housing available out there. So if everybody does what I did and they take their, pretty affordable long-term rental and they convert that to a short-term rental, or investors come into town and they buy up entire buildings or 20 or 30 or hundreds of properties at a time, and they take all of those long-term rentals and they convert those to short-term rentals, what happens is you reduce the supply of long-term rentals available. And so the concern is that when you reduce that supply, the price of rent goes higher and there's no more affordable housing out there. Now, what you'll sort of notice as a trend is the cities that have the most issue with affordable housing, they will tend to have the most strict Airbnb regulations. So they're like, they're super strict in areas like Manhattan and San Francisco about what can and can't be an Airbnb. Now, City of Denver did its own study on the economic impact of Airbnb. Now, keep in mind, City of Denver limits the number of Airbnbs out there, but Airbnbs are about 1% of the housing stock in Denver. And basically, because it's only 1% of the housing stock in Denver, there's no effect whatsoever on rent rates or housing prices as a result of short-term rentals out there. A national study found a little bit different. The results of the national study were a 10% increase in short-term rentals results in a 0.5% increase in rent and a 0.75% increase in home prices. So that, I think, is also a relatively small amount. Of course, the higher the concentration of short-term rental you have in your neighborhood, like for example in Denver Highlands and downtown, the rents in Highlands are very high. There's a ton of short-term rentals there. So I think the higher the concentration, the more of an effect that could have. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence out there, and a lot of mountain towns are sort of taking action um, to regulate Airbnb because they do feel that Airbnb and short-term rentals and vacation rentals, even though they've been around forever in these towns, is affecting the price of houses for the workforce, like affordable housing. So what they're finding is that the people who are working in the restaurants, who are working at the ski resorts, are having to move farther and farther away from these areas. So certain counties have taken actions to further regulate Airbnb. Route County is a great example. They only allow short-term rentals in the municipality, and then anything outside of the municipality has to be either, an owner-occupied home or a long-term rental, so that there's a place for that workforce to live. Any questions on all of this? And then for a long time, like really, we never heard anything positive about the economic impact of Airbnb. And just recently, what happened is with some of the proposed changes to the rules in Denver, the Airbnb hosts in Denver really got together. They really aligned. They started sort of forming a coalition to fight for the rights as short-term rental hosts. And they put on what they called a Good Neighbors Summit. They put that on mid-November, right before Thanksgiving, and it was a really great summit. Lisa and I went there. It was a lot of fun. But one of the speakers at that summit was Visit Denver, and so we were able to get some data from the tourism boards as to how short-term rentals affect the economy. And so that was a lot of fun. So what they told us was that 40% of tourist income comes from short-term rentals. um, that's 25 billion in revenue to restaurants and cafes. The one thing that really came up is that having Airbnbs and short-term rentals within neighborhoods, it really affects your little microeconomy where you're living. So that coffee shop around the corner from my carriage house gets probably, more business than it would if there were no short-term rentals in my neighborhood. So it's affecting sort of local economies in a different way than your normal hotel tourism does. There was a 300 guest survey. The survey was done sort of across neighborhoods, across um, different sizes and types of listings. Guests were here for different purposes. Based on this 300 guest survey, they extrapolated that there's about 10 million in monthly business income and about 1.2 million in small service income. So the small service income is like, an example is the jobs created through Airbnb. There's a whole market for cleaners out there who specialize in vacation rentals now that take care of the linens. They work during certain hours of the day, that sort of thing. There's a specialty for someone like me. There's a co-host job out there for people. So little things like that. And then of course, the lodgers tax. Uh, in 2019, the numbers just came out. We collected 10.1 million in lodgers tax in the city of Denver, directly related to short-term rentals. A lot of that money goes towards health and safety for the city. Some of it, of course, goes to tourism and things like that as well. So there are definitely, it's nice that we're starting to see two sides of the story, whereas for a long time, up until just recently, we were only sort of seeing the one side of the story. Any questions? So this is where everyone is most interested in the class. So the rules and regulations on Airbnb. And what I always preface this portion of the class with is everything is ever changing. So as an agent or as an investor, one thing that you need to keep in mind if you're interested in investing in short-term rentals or you have clients who are asking you about short-term rentals is that it's ever changing. And so what is true today will probably not be true 6 months from now or a year from now. And what we are seeing is we are seeing a trend towards more regulation and restriction versus the other way around where cities and counties are becoming more lax about things. Um, so in the metro area, the rules are mostly based around primary residence. That's what Denver, Boulder, and Aurora all establish. very early on. Denver made their rules in 2017. I think Boulder and Aurora did the same. And so all of these three cities made a primary residence rule, and that's cities have tended to follow suit to that primary residence rule, at least in the Denver metro area. So that's the rule in Golden. That's the rule. It's either the rule, the primary residence rule, or they just don't allow it at all, is what I should say. So that's what we're starting to see as the trend. Yes. So it can be, depending on what city you are in, it can be a rental property, but the tenant would be the primary resident. So in Denver, the tenant would be the primary resident. So, and this is the other thing that makes this extremely complicated, is that the rules are different city by city and county by county. The definition of primary resident is different city by city and county by county. So in Denver, at the current moment, we have a very loose definition of primary residence. In Boulder, it's defined by the number of days you stay in the property. It's the same thing in Colorado Springs. And so how it's defined is city by city, essentially. Yeah. Yeah, so like I said, the rules are different city by city, county by county. The Denver metro area tends to do the primary residence rule, um, or restrict it completely. Summit County does not have a primary residence rule, so you do not have to be a primary resident in order to rent a property short term in Summit County, which would be, they've always had short term rentals up there, so it would be a very stark change for the investors up there if they had to live up there in order to rent their homes out short term. Yeah. Correct. Yes. Short term rentals are 30 days or less. And most cities, that's one thing that is consistent. Most cities are defining it as 30 days or less. Yeah.
How does the second home come in? Have you seen that being challenged as far as like you live miles away and this is your second home, it's your primary residence, but it's also available for Airbnb?
Yeah. So in city of Denver, Um, it's great. It's really great area. It has come into question. There was a case where City of Denver tried to revoke a license for a woman who lived part time in Denver and part time up in the mountains. She really you can't determine if you're half and half, which one is your primary residence. And so she fought that, and I think the city ended up dropping that case. But there's a ton, just a ton of subjectivity and gray area to it. And I'll speak to that more when I talk about what we learned in the short-term rental committee meeting last night for Denver. So, any other questions before I go on? Yeah, sure. Yeah, so it tends to be, um, excuse me, when cities are regulating short-term rental, it tends to be a two-step process to this regulation. Most cities are requiring that you get a short-term rental license. Even the places who have had short vacation rentals for a long time, like it's required in Summit County. But essentially, what you have to do is you have to get a tax ID because the city wants to be able to collect that lodging tax for you. And then you also, after you get your tax ID, you have to get a short-term rental, either registration or business license. That it goes by different terms depending on where you are. In Denver, it's considered a short-term rental business license. So it's typically a two-step process, and the application process will be different city by city and county by county, and how that works. And so what I always recommend is that if you have clients looking to purchase property and use it as short-term rental, the first thing to do is to give a call directly to that city, give a call directly to that county, and just say, hey, we're thinking about doing this. What do I need to do in order to make sure I'm compliant with doing this short-term rental? And that's the best source of information out there, because if you try to keep up, look for it on Google, it's almost impossible unless you get directly to that city or county's website. And not all cities have short-term rental information posted on their websites. Yeah.
to approve sprinkler installation if you don't have a sprinkler installed or maybe a pump plant. So definitely the people that are investing in the property, regardless of where they're at, look at all of those different factors, not just the permits and the licenses, but all the other caveats that might come up, because that could make or break whether or not someone actually wants to invest in that property depending on what their goal is.
Yeah, absolutely. So what she was saying is that depending on where the short-term rental is located, there are different regulations as to the occupancy of that short-term rental. And the occupancy can really make or break how much money you earn over the course of a year on a short-term rental. So Denver is one of the few places there's no occupancy limit whatsoever. So if I have a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom place, I can allow 20 people to sleep there if I want to. Wouldn't be comfortable, wouldn't get good reviews, but technically you could do that. But you do have people, cramming 10 or 12 people into a 3-bedroom home with 2 bathrooms. Um, and that's allowed in the city of Denver right now. Now, other cities, what most of them who are allowing short term rentals tend to do is they tend to follow the occupancy limit of the city itself. So, in Boulder, I think it's no more than 3 or 4 unrelated people. That's the rule in Boulder, things like that. In the city of Denver, for a long-term rental, I can't have more than 3 unrelated people in the home, even if it's a 6-bedroom house. So it's interesting to me that there's no regulation on the short term, but there is regulation on the long term there. The other thing you want to keep in mind is you want to keep in mind your HOA rules. Different HOAs have different rules. What we are finding is that most HOAs disallow short-term rentals. As soon as somebody starts to do it, they put in some sort of a, rule and regulation that says minimum lease of 30 days or 6 months or something along those lines. And then the other thing to be aware of is, and this is mostly applicable to Denver, is your lease rules. In Denver, you are allowed to be a renter, you're allowed to be the primary resident and get that short-term rental business license, but your lease must say that you are allowed to short-term rent your property. As landlords, if you have properties, you want to be very careful because a lot of tenants are renting out homes and they short term rent them to help supplement their income or while they're on vacation, or sometimes they rent them out for the specific purpose to short term rent the home. So, in all of our leases, we have very specific language about short term rentals, allowing guests in the home, in addition to the no subletting clauses that we have. And then as landlords, when you go and you visit your properties, just keep an eye out for things like lock boxes or like a little sign in the house that tells you what the Wi-Fi password is. That's a sure sign that your tenant is renting out the home on Airbnb. Any questions?
So as this is just sort of great. So
Yeah.
how can the municipality possibly who's regulating?
Yeah, so it really depends on the sort of the budget of the municipality and how many people they have on it. Oh, so the question was, is how are cities enforcing and regulating? And so, City of Denver, City of Boulder, they pay for compliance software. So City of Denver knows exactly how many days out of the year you have your property available, how many days out of the year you have it rented out. So City of Denver is able to somewhat regulate through the compliance software. Same with City of Boulder, neighbor complaints, things like that. And then City of Denver is actually, they have a whole committee or task force that's committed to going through these rental applications, and so they're cross-checking your billing address with your property address, with your utility bill, with your voter's registration, things like that. So that's how they're regulating it. It is definitely a challenge. But what most cities are doing that aren't larger cities with a gajillion Airbnb rentals is they're waiting, they're saying it's not allowed. If a neighbor complains, they'll provide a zoning violation or something along those lines. Airbnb has really tried to stay away from helping in any sort of regulation in Airbnb for cities. So it's been sort of a point of contention with the city of Denver and with Airbnb. City of Denver has been asking Airbnb to take down listings that don't have a valid short-term rental license or that don't have any, days available and things like that, so that they can regulate with a little bit more efficiency. But so far, Airbnb has refused to do that. They said they're working on it, but it's been a year and a half or something like that. It's not happened yet. So Airbnb is trying to stay out of the regulation piece of things. So the application process in Denver has been evolving over time. They started in 2017. It was a fairly simple, fast, quick, easy application process. I think when I first got my rental license, I got it within 24 to 48 hours. I applied. I didn't provide any documentation. I said, "I'm Sabrina. Give me my license." They were like, "Here you go." As time has gone on, they've updated the online process. They've updated the website. They've updated the questions that they ask. And the most recent update, and we will have more updates coming this year, the most recent update to the application process was in April of 2019. One of the first things that they did was add insurance requirements. And Lisa is going to get up and speak about the insurance requirements.
You turn 50 and you can't see anymore.
Let's see. This is,
Is that it?
hello?
Oh,
Is it working? I think so. All right.
is it working? No.
No. It's, of course, I'm wearing one, right?
I'll just talk into your mic.
If you want to.
Is that the on?
That is the
I
on
think we're
button.
supposed to hold it. There we go.
Oh.
All right.
You got it.
So I actually got to advise the Excise and Licensing Committee in Denver because I didn't think people were doing it maliciously. I just didn't think that when they decided to rent out their basement or room in their house, they thought, "Oh, I better call my homeowner's insurance company," right? I mean, we just don't think of those things. But if you're using your home in a different way than your homeowner's insurance company thinks you're using it and there's a claim, they can deny that claim. Okay, so that is earth shattering, and people do not understand that. So, what they added to the licensing is just simply a check mark. And I'm already noticing huge improvements that people are calling us now going, "Oh, I am doing this and I need to get in my rider or change my policy or whatever," just simply by check marking off when they go to get their license that they have notified their homeowner's insurance company. So, Airbnb offers $1 million policy for all of their hosts. Thank you. And that is good enough for the city, but I'm telling you that there are huge gaps to that policy. They have two things. Oh, go back. Oh. So they have host guarantee and a host protection policy, and both of those are worth $1 million. Airbnb's policies are ever changing. And if you call them, which we have, these people have absolutely no idea what's going on with their insurance policy, which is terrifying, right? Plus, are you going to trust your home to a policy that is virtually free? They are providing this policy for free. If you look at the numbers and the amount of people who are actually doing short-term rental and what Airbnb has paid out, they don't match up at all. Okay. The biggest thing is that it will not cover your home. Okay. The biggest investment that you will ever make is not covered by this policy. So if a guest of yours leaves a candle burning and your house burns down, do you think Airbnb is going to cover rebuilding your home? No, they're not. So that's huge. The coverage is only applicable from the time that they are checking in and the time they check out. So if your guest arrives early and stays late, there's going to be no coverage for that on that policy. The biggest one is loss of income. So we know that 58% of people who are doing short-term rental in Denver are doing it so they can pay their mortgage. So if you have a kitchen fire and you cannot rent out your home for a period of time, you're losing income, right? Your homeowner's insurance policy will cover that loss of income. Airbnb is not going to cover that loss of income. Do you think insurance companies love short-term rental? So after auto, it is the second highest liability. So we don't love it, but we're jumping on board. But not all people are jumping on board. So please do not assume that your company has coverage and go ahead and do this. They are, if they do not like it and they do not want it, when they come out for renewal, they're going to inspect and they're going to look for things like lock boxes, separate entrances, more cars parked than probably should be, and they will drop you instantly. Okay? Yes.
Question, do you have any information about whether mortgage companies, people write their own home, they own mortgage on it,
Mm-hmm.
so they got that as an owner occupied property, owner occupied open space, but are there any restrictions on the mortgage companies with these?
Where is Stacy? Stacy?
Or
Did
Chelsea, where'd they go?
they went back to their office? Oh, they're eating. Okay, hold that thought. I'm going to let them answer that question. I'm not a mortgage person. How many of you have an umbrella policy in the room? Okay, if you do not have your hand up, you call me or your company when you leave this room. They are critical, absolutely critical, especially if you're realtors. And they are dirt cheap. So I have $1 million policy. It's about $20 a month, worth every penny, right? If you are short-term renting your house and you do not have the proper insurance for that, do you think your umbrella is going to kick in? It is not. Absolutely not. Okay, so don't think, oh, I've got an umbrella, I'm good. If it's not written properly, the umbrella will not kick in. Okay, we spoke to a renter renting out the home on short-term rental. Well, I could tell you about 52 things that are wrong with that, but insurance is going to be one of your major ones. So insurance companies really do not like this because we've got one person who really doesn't have a dog in the fight, right? Renting out to another person who really doesn't have a dog in the fight. We have one policy that will cover that, but is under the control of the renter. Okay. So you will be named insured as the landlord, but the renter has complete control over that policy. So if they decide to cancel it or it lapses, you might not be notified for 2 to 3 months that that has happened, depending on how efficient your insurance companies are. Okay. Hi, ladies. Did you floss your teeth? Did you brush? Okay. All right. All right. Any questions for me on the insurance? All right.
Okay, so my understanding of the question is if someone purchases a property as a primary residence, but then turns it into an investment property and they're doing Airbnb, could the lender call the note due? Is that right? Okay, so it depends on the circumstances. If someone bought it as a primary residence and then the next month they're turning it into an investment property and renting it out, that will be an issue with the lender and they will likely consider that situation fraud. So that would be a big issue. If it's an understandable situation, such as they buy a property, wife gets pregnant, family size is growing, they need a bigger house, and it's 9 months down the road, then that would make sense to the lender. People's circumstances change. So it would be something that the lender would look into and could potentially call the note due if it's fraud.
Okay, I get that. Yeah, but I just couldn't remember if there were any deed restrictions of in the deed of trust, for Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac or FHA with regards to that as of yet.
At closing, they're signing that their intent is to occupy the property for 12 months. But still, people's circumstances change. And so there's even times where we'll do a primary residence for someone and something changes. The underwriter will ask about it. We have to explain the situation. But again, if it makes sense, then we can do a new primary residence in less than a year's time.
But I think she's talking about where you allow an Airbnb while you continue to occupy the property.
Okay, then that would not be a problem with the lender. So if they're living there, we would still treat it as a primary residence. Yes, then that could raise red flags with the lender. Yes, with FHA, it is a little bit different. But even still, we've done loans where if they buy it as a primary and their circumstances change, we do a new loan in less than 12 months. I'm not familiar with reverse, but we wouldn't have an issue with them renting out like if they had a carriage home or an ADU or something like that if they had an FHA loan.
Do you want to
All
talk
right.
about income qualifications, like how the Airbnb income can qualify?
Okay, so Sabrina just asked if I wanted to cover the income qualification piece of it. So, as a mortgage broker, because we have access to so many different lenders, I've checked on this with them, and it varies, to be honest, how each of our individual lenders we work with will treat the short term rental income. But we have some lenders, with all that to be said, we have some lenders where we can use the income to help qualify them, but most of them we cannot. Accessory dwelling unit. All right. Any other questions for me? Yes. No, we would not be able to use that income. So, so I don't want to get too far off topic here from the class, but that's border income and that's a whole different thing. But if you reach out to me, I can give you more information on that. All right. Any other informations for Airbnb lending stuff? All right. Am I handing it?
Oh, I have a microphone, so
Oh.
I think just turn it off. Yeah. Yeah, I think yeah. I'm going to give it back to you for now. Yeah, so thank you so much to both of you guys for uh, giving us a little bit more information on that. I did want to go back a little bit to discuss uh, talking about having renters as your primary resident. It using a renter as your primary resident has been a loophole that a lot of investors have used in the Denver area to operate Airbnbs as investors. There are definitely a lot of risks to doing that, um, not only through the insurance piece of things, but just kind of how things go. Um, if you are a investor who wants to allow your renter to Airbnb a property, you know there are certainly good sides to this. You know, in order to be an Airbnb, the property needs to be well taken care of, right? Like you need to always keep the yard nice, always keep it clean. Those are all wonderful things as a landlord. But the scary part is that you need to know your renter and you need to know your renter well. I had an acquaintance or a friend who is now a client, but prior to her coming on with us, she had a property in Platt Park, a nice, beautiful old Victorian home that she found come vacant in the winter time. And so, in order to fill that home quickly, she rented it to someone who she loosely knew, who intended to Airbnb out the home. And so this acquaintance of hers claimed the home as her primary residence, but she was living probably about 40 minutes away. She wasn't necessarily the most hands-on responsible host out there. And so what happened is she really didn't know what was going on with the property unless a guest happened to mention something to her through like the communications. And guests can be very vague about things. It's not appropriate necessarily to ask too many troubleshooting questions with a guest. And so what used to happen is that the guest would send some sort of a vague message like, you know, the heat isn't working or it's super cold in here. And this woman would call my friend and tell her, you have to get over there right away to fix this property. Something's wrong with it. Of course, she couldn't give her any information about it because she didn't know. She hadn't been there in months. And it needs to be fixed right away because I'm going to lose Airbnb income if you don't fix this for me. So that's sort of like a terrible landlord tenant dynamic to have and establish. But it is, it gets established if your tenant is depending on Airbnb income. The other most risky thing about this was that this is an old Victorian home. The heating is a little bit inconsistent. And so you only know what the guest tells you if you're not going to that home, if you're not really involved. And what happened is some guests decided that they were cold and they had 6 electric space heaters running in this old Victorian home. And nobody knew about it until there was a electrical arc behind the wall. And thank goodness the house didn't burn down. But then after that, they had no heat. So then we heard about it. Um, but that homeowner would not have had any coverage had her house burned down. And so it can be risky to have a renter in your home and allow them to Airbnb the property. And so that's a perfect example of why you just want to make sure you have the proper insurance on that house. Any other questions on any of that? Okay. Yeah.
If you have a renter in your property who does plan to Airbnb it, is that renter able to get a business license and a tax ID number
Yes.
and fulfill the requirements of the city of Denver to be able to own the property?
Correct. In the city of Denver, you can be a renter. You just need you need to provide proof of permission from your landlord and proof that it's your primary residence. So, yeah, so Denver allows it. In Boulder, it is the name of the ownership on the property. That is the only person allowed to get the short-term rental business license, and they have to be the primary resident in the home. So, city of Denver is unique. Yeah.
So I'm sorry, so I guess I didn't quite understand. If I have a renter who want to buy a house in Denver, you're saying that the Airbnb is that allowed?
If
How come it's Denver? This doesn't have to be my client's primary residence.
it is not allowed.
It is not allowed. So my client do have to physically live there.
They have to be the primary resident, yes, unless they decide to use this loophole where they put a renter in place that they fully trust and have that renter be the primary resident and get the license. Yes, yeah. Any other questions? Okay. So more things that they added in the application process in April of 2019 is they asked homeowners to confirm that their HOA has been notified. It's just a check mark. And then they added denial or revocation for good cause. So the denial or revocation for good cause is very subjective. Um, Basically, all of your neighbors hate the fact that you have an Airbnb. They all complain. The city can decide to deny your license. I've only heard of one instance where the city used this denial or revocation for good cause. Um, there was a gentleman who lived in the country club neighborhood, or he had a house in the country club neighborhood that he would rent on Airbnb, and he'd rent it out to like 20 people at a time, and it was a total party every single night, with trash everywhere, late night noise and things like that. So, as you can imagine, country club is a nice, quiet neighborhood. The neighbors did not like that very much. So the city of Denver, this was the first person the city of Denver ever tried to take legal action against. The city tried to take legal action because they said he was claiming that home to be his primary residence, when it was not. However, this person had all of his paperwork in line. So the city of Denver has a very loose definition of primary residence. It's actually it's the place you go home to, and defined by the address on your driver's license and a secondary piece of documentation, such as a utility bill, car registration, voter's registration, something like that. So that's really all you need. But that's why we have so many entire home rentals in the city of Denver, because that's all you needed to say something was your primary residence. Well, the city of Denver tried to, you know, take legal action against this homeowner because they felt it wasn't truly his primary residence. This homeowner had all his ducks in a row. He owned 4 other properties. He had long-term leases on every other property. And so there was nowhere else he could be but that house in Country Club. So City of Denver couldn't take legal action against him, but what they did do was they revoked his license for good cause because the neighbors were upset about it. So City of Denver has proposed several changes to the rules because, as we discussed, that primary residence definition is super vague um, for the City of Denver right now. They've been trying to propose changes throughout 2019. I would this Unfortunately, this is not the most updated proposed changes because they literally changed it last night, and the newest slide did not make it to over here before the class started. So I will send out a link to the newest changes for all of you, but they actually are, this is pretty well, it's very close because they didn't change the proposed changes very much at all last night. But City of Denver, the first thing to know is City of Denver is not putting a number of days stayed in the home limitation to define primary residence. So they had at one point in time proposed a 183-day rule, which met so much opposition amongst the hosts and the people of Denver that they decided not to do that. So they are definitely not making the rule that you have to be in the home 183 days out of the year for it to be considered your primary residence. But what City of Denver has done is they put in a set of, a list of things that basically may or may not qualify or disqualify you as a primary residence, and resident, and it's extremely subjective. So a couple of things the City of Denver has proposed is that, they're going to be reviewing all of your paperwork very thoroughly. They're going to check, do you own other homes in Denver? What, what are who's on title for those other homes? Who's on title for your current home? On the utility bill that you've submitted, is the billing address for that utility bill different from the billing address of the property? Is your child registered to vote in the same district where your Airbnb property is? Where are you registered? Where is your child registered to vote? Is your child registered in school in the same district? And are you registered to vote in that same district? So they're checking all of that stuff. There's a couple of items that they've included in the proposal that are meeting a lot of opposition. Number one, they did tell us that they're not doing the 183-day rule specifically, but they did say that they might look at how often someone is in the property, and that may or may not disqualify them from being a primary resident. So what they'll do is they'll look at all of your factors in combination. So for example, I travel 70% of the time for work. Well, obviously I'm not going to be in the house 50% of the time. So since I travel for work legitimately, what they might do is they might ask for my employment and my income, and that's the other opposition out there, is they're asking too many questions. Um, they'll say, okay, you don't need to be in the home that much because you travel all the time. You're the primary resident, but you have to prove it to me by showing me what you do for a living and why you travel so much. And so there's a lot of opposition to the invasiveness of the process that City of Denver is sort of proposing to determine primary residence. Questions? Yes. You do have to renew your license yearly. So it is something that you prove on a yearly basis. You do not get grandfathered into your primary residence. Yeah. Any other questions on that? And so what I would like to make very, very clear is that none of these proposals are official yet. We probably won't have like an official new primary resident definition until sometime mid this year. So none of these are official yet, but what the truth is that the city of Denver is still looking at all of these things, and they may or may not question your application based on these items right now. So always like to talk a little bit about the enforcement of the primary resident rule in the Denver area. Denver has taken a very unique approach to all of this. Denver is the only city that I've heard of, or in the world or country, that has ever charged a felony in relation to Airbnb. Over the summertime, the city of Denver did charge 4 people very publicly with felonies for operating, not for operating Airbnbs, but for um, allegedly claiming something was their primary residence when it wasn't. So I'll go over the case, a couple of cases here so that you guys have a better understanding of how the city of Denver works. So they charged 2 real estate agents, they charged a builder, and they charged an attorney in relation to operating Airbnbs. Um, I'll go over the case for the real estate agents for you. So the case of, since it's near and dear to many of us here, the case of the real estate agents, the alleged primary residence is located in Stapleton. Each agent had their own primary residence Airbnb that they were operating. And what happened was that one of these Airbnbs was flagged because a neighbor complained about the Airbnb and said someone's operating an illegal Airbnb, or maybe they complained that someone was having a party. I'm not sure what the complaint was, to be honest. But once the complaint was filed, what the city of Denver did was they did a little bit of extra research. They saw that this Airbnb was owned in the name of an LLC, which owning in an LLC, I can tell you, will flag the city right away, even though there's reason to have your primary residence in an LLC, depending on who you are and why. But they looked at who the LLC was registered to and the address where the LLC was registered. So that led them to these 2 agents and their Stapleton property. And so what they did was, the city of Denver, they don't just say, we think this is not your primary residence, I'm going to charge you with a felony. There was a sort of a process. City of Denver will typically start to ask questions. They'll give warnings, and then they'll give tickets and things like that. And what happened was City of Denver asked a lot of questions. The agents maintained that these properties were their primary residences. And finally, the City of Denver got to the point where they just, for whatever reason, the City of Denver did not believe them. The City of Denver decided to hand over an affidavit, which is a legal document that claims these residences were their primary residences. And these realtors signed these affidavits. Once they signed these affidavits, they handed them back to the city official. That was the charge, was leading a city official. So that handing that paper back was leading a city official. And once those affidavits were handed back to the city officials, what they did was they opened up an investigation, a criminal investigation against this couple. They staked them out at their Stapleton home. They staked them out at their Airbnb properties. They spoke to their neighbors. They watched them coming and going. And then, excuse me, where City of Denver really felt they had a lot of evidence was that these 2 realtors had marketing material out there that discussed how much they loved living in the Stapleton neighborhood. And so at that time, these 2 realtors were charged with the felonies. We don't know the outcome of this case yet. My understanding is that the agents truly believe that they were operating legally and that they are working with their attorneys to just gather up everything they need to gather up to go into court and fight the charges. We won't know what happens probably until way later this year. One of the cases was dismissed. The case against the attorney was dismissed. What happened with his case was he went into his court hearing. He had his partner in his firm there. You know, he had a couple of witnesses and things like that, and he had to go into court and explain like, hey, my wife and I were having marital issues. We owned a rental property that happened to be vacant. I moved into that property and used it as my primary residence when I wasn't, you know, sometimes staying in the family home or staying, you know, elsewhere. And when I applied for this license, this was my primary residence. And he had witnesses, you know, who were who basically testified to the fact that, you know, yes, that's what they did. They were having marital issues, and he had to sort of air everything out there. And then the the judge dismissed the case because they determined that at the time he applied for his short-term rental license, it was truly his primary residence. And then I don't know what's happened to that builder yet. We haven't heard anything about that yet. Do you guys have questions on the cases at all at this moment? Okay. A couple of things to keep in mind. So this tactic of making public felonies was really effective for the city of Denver. Airbnb, the number of Airbnb listings it dropped dramatically within a couple of weeks. You know, people were surrendering their licenses. They took listings down. You know, we had a 25% reduction in Airbnb listings out there. The use of the affidavit has been very effective for the city of Denver. The city of Denver does continue to use that affidavit. They are mostly using the affidavit in the case of people renewing their licenses. If someone goes to renew their license, they start looking into things and it's just, you know, questionable to the city of Denver whether or not something is their primary residence. They will give someone an affidavit to sign at that time. They've put out 409 affidavits. Of those 409 affidavits, most people have just decided it's not worth trying to be an Airbnb host. 99 of those have been approved as primary residences and gotten their licenses. Um, Other things to keep in mind is City of Denver is sort of using the standard that you can only have one primary residence. It's one short-term license per household per deed. And as real estate agents, it's just something that you should be aware of. You should be asking your sellers to disclose whether or not they have ever used the home as an Airbnb or if they have ever had an Airbnb license on the home, because we're running into a couple of issues with home sales and Airbnb licenses. So you guys may have read this. This article just came out earlier this week. You know, there was a nice couple who received a $150 ticket for operating an illegal Airbnb. And the truth is, they had just purchased the home, and the person prior to them had an outstanding Airbnb listing that was up but not available. They didn't have the proper registration on it, and this poor new buyer got the ticket for it. So the city, you know, they didn't actually end up giving them the ticket, but it was a little bit of a hassle to go through. And of course, no one likes to get a ticket for something they're not guilty of. And they're going to call you if that happens, of course. So it's just something to be aware of. The other thing that might happen is that it's one license per household per deed. So if you have a buyer who purchases a home and they intend to Airbnb a part of that home, and they go to apply for that license, if there was already an Airbnb license on that property, they will get denied because there's already a license. And then you have to go back to that seller and get them to surrender their license so your buyer can then use the home in the way that they wanted to use it. Any questions on any of this? Yes.
So in your case, it's not separate deal, correct?
Correct.
You can Airbnb both an ADU and your primary residence.
So technically, yes. So the way it works, it's one short-term rental license per household per deed. So my carriage house it has its own address. You know, we're like 1 and 2, but it's all on the same deed. And so I can have what I'm allowed to do is I'm allowed to list any part of my property on Airbnb. I can list my carriage house. I can list my entire home on Airbnb, but you are technically only allowed to have one of those rented out on Airbnb at a time. So if my carriage house is rented on Airbnb, either I have to be, either my main house, just isn't rented at all, or I have a long-term renter in there, sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's not the only risk. So what happens is, so the life of the license is 1 year, but if that seller had a listing on Airbnb and that listing is still somehow on Airbnb, even though no days are available, and that license expires, then all of a sudden that property is in violation. I think you just have to explain to the city, like, look, I'm a new buyer. You can see it was sold on this date, and you just, unfortunately, I think it's a bit of a paperwork hassle. City's not going to nail you if you truly aren't operating an Airbnb. That, yeah, yes, yes. I have definitely heard about that. That's been a discussion that's been on the table for quite some time. Is, do we tax these Airbnb properties? The property tax is commercial properties. That's, they've definitely discussed it in the mountain towns. I haven't. They are not. So you say they're doing it in Park County? Okay, I had not heard that, so that's very interesting. I mean, that if they change the property tax to commercial property tax, it makes or breaks your investment. So that's another risk out there for sure. Now, they have not. There's not been a lot of talk about doing that in Denver or in a lot of the metro areas that I've heard.
So is it calendar year or from year?
It's from the time you get your license, 12 months. Yeah, so it's a rolling year for each individual. Yep. Other questions? All right, guys. So I'll quickly go over some of the numbers for you because I know this is sort of a juicy part of the class. A lot of people are very interested in Airbnb because they're interested in how much money they can make. The perception out there is that Airbnb is extremely lucrative. So just real fast, I'll go over the numbers for my carriage house. So my carriage house would rent out on a long-term basis, $1,400 a month. If I were to rent that out monthly, furnished, I'm looking at probably $1,800 a month. When I rent this carriage house out on Airbnb, my top line revenue is on average, and it fluctuates, of course. It's around $3,500 a month. My take home after cleaning fees is probably $2,500 a month. So you're looking at almost a double take home. In their Denver area on your top line revenue to your long term revenue, top line revenue. But what the truth is that there are so many costs involved in a short term rental that if it's not your primary residence, if you're not already paying for cable, if you're not already paying for yard care, um, your primary residence, you don't need someone to maintain the property and to manage the property. But if you're a hands off investor and you intend to hire a property manager, of course, you intend to hire a cleaner. Um, it might be a wash between a short term and a long term rental. And I share this with you so that you can be sort of the expert when your clients ask you about short term rental. You can share with them, look, short term rental is great. It looks very lucrative on the top line, but there are a lot of costs involved. And so I'll just quickly explain a couple of the larger costs. So take a two-bedroom townhome in the Highlands neighborhood. The top line revenue on Airbnb will be about $50,000 a year. That includes the cleaning fee that you collect from the guest. Now, what you'll keep in mind is you collect that cleaning fee, but then you pay that cleaning fee right out. And so on a short term rental, the average stay is 3.5 days, 100 cleanings per year. That means you're collecting about $10,000 in cleaning fees and paying those right out. So that's $10,000 off of your top line revenue right there. Second, short-term rentals are very active in the management. They are not like your long-term rental where you place that tenant, you might get a call every now and then. You are constantly taking care of that property. You are constantly responding to guests. You have to be on 24 hours a day. Someone gets locked out. That's your responsibility, things like that. So property managers charge for their management time. And so that's anywhere from 25% to 55%. 55% is, parts of the mountains, 25 or 35 to 45%. Those are all mountain. In the city, you're looking at about 25%. If you're going for a full service, you're not doing anything at all management. So that's another $12,500. Well, you start to do the math, and your take home is around $24,000. And that does not even include your upfront cost to invest in the furniture and getting the property ready. Well, I can rent that same townhome out for $2,300 to $2,500 a month, and my take home on that long-term rental is almost exactly the same. Yeah.
One of the things I'm noticing is we're not talking about at all is the wear and tear and use on the property, which is can be quite a lot of money.
Sure, sure. Yeah, and that's actually my next slide. So you were reading my mind. Yeah. Before I go on, any other questions? All right.
So you're, I mean, this is kind of given a personal preference, but
Yeah.
obviously smart product investment, you've got pretty good investment up front. So smart lock, smart lighting, whatever, so you can take care of that product for most.
Yeah, well, it's actually personal preference. So what he was asking is, do you need to invest in smart products like a smart lock and a smart thermostat and things like that? Most of our Airbnb properties that we help to co-host, they do have like that Nest thermostat, and they have a push, electric lock that's Wi-Fi enabled. It's absolutely not necessary, especially if it's on your primary residence. In my carriage house, we have a traditional old lockbox on there, and it has worked out absolutely perfectly for us, so much so that I haven't even felt the need to change the lockout. And then, we could probably benefit from a Nest thermostat, but we just have a normal thermostat in there as well, and people tend to respect it, or it hasn't been an issue. But yeah, that's certainly part of the investment. If you're a hands-off investor, and it's much easier to be hands-off when you have those smart things installed, you would, yeah, that would be part of your investment. Yeah, correct. Correct. Yeah. So you could list those two bedrooms together on one listing, and the people come as, one party. But if you have two listings, only one of those bedrooms can technically be rented out through Airbnb at a time. Now, my understanding is that City of Denver is not regulating that incredibly heavy, especially if it's your primary residence and you're there. Certainly, those people probably aren't causing too much issue. But I have heard of it being regulated. I received a call from um, a person who was a renter in a home. Actually, she was doing that for an investor who was her boss, and um, City of Denver had shut them down and told them that they could either rent out the whole house or one room at a time, and it wasn't going to be profitable anymore for that investor. And so she was sort of looking for a job at that time. So it's it's kind of one of those things where you decide what your risk tolerance is. Do you just do it until someone tells you not to? Probably that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. So, Yeah. So I wanted to talk quickly about some of the pros and cons of short-term rentals. Um, excuse me. So short-term rental, big pro. Obviously, it can be extremely lucrative. It's been a nice little, subsidy for me on my carriage house that I never ever expected. Everything we earn is pure gravy, and it's much more than I would earn on a long-term rental. Um, I'd never have to worry about rent collection; just automatically deposits into my account. I've never had any issues with tenants. We've actually, on all of the properties that we co-host, we've never had any issues with tenants whatsoever. But that part of the reason for that is that certain properties are more risky than other properties. So, my little carriage house that sleeps two people in Wash Park is totally different from a nice big house right by Coors Field that sleeps 15 people. You'll get a party every time at that big house, but in my house, people are just coming to hang out. And that those are typically, since we do, we co-host primary residences. That's what we typically co-host. So it's never been an issue. So I can tell you, like, there are risks with Airbnb, but the type of property you have on and how many guests you have can really affect how risky that property is. You get to meet new people. Generally, guests are very upbeat. They're coming there, they're excited, they're full of compliments. Whereas on a long term rental, you have a very different relationship with your renter. We get along well with all of our renters, but we still ask them when they move in to go over the entire property and tell us everything that's wrong with that property because we want to make sure we have great documentation on what should be returned in that security deposit. Um, I fell in love with Airbnb, and this is, I think, contrary to what you might suspect, and it depends on the property. I fell in love with Airbnb because my carriage house that I remodeled 3.5 years ago looks just like it did 3.5 years ago. And the reason for that is because that thing is cleaned from top to bottom every 3.5 days. I can go into my carriage house between guests and fix that loose doorknob or repaint that little scuff on the wall. So you have the opportunity to better maintain a short-term rental. Does it cost more? Absolutely. But you don't get the wear and tear that you get on a long-term rental because if I showed up every 3.5 days at any of my long-term rentals, I'd probably get arrested. So you just can't do it. Um, the big cons are that it's extremely time intensive. This if you have clients who are interested in investing in short-term rentals, they should know that this is not a passive investment. Even if you are hiring cleaners out, it's important that you maintain the home. Number one, you're going in and you're checking on the property between guests because if there's any damage, the only way you get to claim any of that damage is if you have clear evidence of what it looked like right before that guest checked in. You're constantly managing your listing. There's 3,500 active Airbnb listings in Denver. 10 of those show up on the top page. And so you're constantly managing your listing to make sure that it's showing up on the top page. You're managing your pricing to make sure you're gaining the most revenue possible. It fluctuates according to supply and demand daily, just like a hotel does. And if you're not managing that pricing, you're leaving money on the table. You're probably not ranking very high on Airbnb. So and you're constantly responding to guests. So if you have clients who, they work at an office, they go into meetings for an hour or two at a time, they're not able to respond on their cell phone during those times. So make them aware, like, this is what it takes. You really got to be active and involved. Um, just a quick explanation of what my company does as a co-host is we really specialize in working with those primary resident Airbnbs. So we help you handle all of that guest communication, all of that marketing, all of that booking. We charge between 4 and 10% for our services, depending on how much you need. So we try to put our hosts in a position where they can be very profitable, but they don't have to worry about a lot of the day to day to it. And then since it's their primary residence, they're already maintaining that home. They can go in and check on it. They can, sometimes they coordinate with their own guests, things like that. The biggest con to the Airbnb is that the rules aren't established. So what you were allowed to do when you bought the place, you might not be allowed to do later. And I think, and I think that's the biggest con is the uncertainty with where the Airbnb market is going. You know, the market and availabilities out there is constantly changing. Your pricing is constantly different. Um, that's the biggest con to Airbnb. So, any questions? Yeah. Yeah, so it's so what Air the way the Airbnb platform does is you can enter in a security deposit on Airbnb. The excuse me, the guest is not charged that deposit. But if I were to file a claim, at that point in time, the guest would be charged from that security deposit for damages. If they damaged above and beyond the security deposit, there's a resolution process that you go through with Airbnb. Airbnb is really good about it, so long as you have everything documented appropriately. If you don't have documentation, it can be more difficult. Um, Airbnb is good about property damage done by guests, but as far as what Lisa had gone over, the insurance, the liability, anything major, it you call Airbnb and the customer service has not a clue what's going on. So as a host, it's very important to be informed, to really review that Airbnb website, and you sometimes tell the customer service what needs to be done. So, any other questions?
So, on the laws and restrictions, since you're still there, this scenario that came up, there was in the weekend, there was a certain guest that kept renting this Airbnb. Turns out she was very attractive. She had a side home business going
Uh,
in this room.
uh-huh.
So, who's responsible for making sure the laws are
Being followed? That's a very good question. And, I think as the homeowner, I guess I think in general, it's always up to the individual who witnesses it whether or not they want to report that. But can the homeowner be held responsible in some way? I really don't know, to be honest. Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you so much. Yes. But yes. Yeah, most of them do not allow it. Yeah. Most of them have a minimum lease term. Yeah, and you had a question? Yeah, so far in the Denver metro area, they have not done any sort of grandfathering. So say like they make the rule that um, all of a sudden carriage houses aren't allowed as Airbnbs, I wouldn't get my license the next time around. So um, Lisa is going to come up and wrap up the class for us.
So it may appear
Here,
that
let me put this me on.
Sabrina and I, our bread and butter is on Airbnb, and we love teaching this
I actually
class.
think
We
it's
love
out of
sharing
battery.
this information to you all, and it's been super, super fun for the last year. But our bread and butter actually is not Airbnb. My bread and butter is your buyers. We love. Thank you. We really appreciate realtors and loan officers, and we love working with your clients. So please keep me in mind for your insurance referrals. Actually, Sabrina's bread and butter is long term
Yeah.
rentals, not short term rentals. So please keep her in mind for your referrals for those things. I get questions like, how in the world do you take care of all your clients when you're teaching all day long? And I want to be very clear that I have an incredible team back in the office who is caring for all of my clients, and Sabrina does as well. So we're not trying, it would be absolutely impossible for us to try to do all of this at once. Thank you for having us. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks everybody for coming, and thank you to Lisa and Sabrina for a wonderful class. I'm sure you can reach out to them further if you have questions, but it was a lot of great information. Have a great day.